My name is Sarah, and I am 34 years old. I never imagined I would be a widow this young. 3 months ago, my world shattered when Michael, my husband of 11 years, died suddenly from a brain aneurysm. One Tuesday morning, he kissed me goodbye and complained about a headache. By noon, he was gone. Just like that. No warning, no goodbye. Just emptiness. The funeral was a blur of black dresses and sympathetic faces. I moved through it like a ghost, accepting hugs from people whose names I could not remember, listening to condolences that sounded like static in my ears. My younger sister, Jennifer, barely showed up. She sent texts all week saying her son, Ethan, was sick or she could not find childcare. When she finally appeared at the service, she stayed in the back and left before anyone could talk to her. I was too numb to care. 1 week later, I got an invitation to Ethan's first birthday party. The last thing I wanted to do was celebrate anything, but my mother called me every day, insisting I should go. She said Michael would want you to be there for family, she told me. He always said family comes first. So I dragged myself out of bed, put on some makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes, wrapped a present, and drove to Jennifer's rental house across town. When I walked in, something felt wrong. People were whispering in corners and falling silent when they saw me. My parents sat awkwardly at a picnic table in the backyard, avoiding my eyes. I tried to tell myself everyone was just uncomfortable around a widow, that they did not know what to say to me, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Then, Jennifer came outside carrying Ethan on her hip. She was wearing a brand new dress I had never seen before, and her hair looked freshly highlighted. She seemed almost excited, which struck me as odd. She tapped a spoon against her cup to get everyone's attention. She said, "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Ethan's special day," she announced loudly. "I have been keeping a secret, and I cannot hide it anymore, especially after recent events." My stomach dropped. I knew whatever was coming would be bad. She said, "Ethan is not Derek's son," Jennifer continued, her eyes locking onto mine. "He is Michael's son. My brother-in-law and I had an affair 2 years ago. It was a mistake, but these things happen. Michael knew the truth, and before he died, he updated his will to provide for his biological son. Ethan is entitled to half of the house Michael and Sarah owned." The backyard went silent. Everyone stared at me, waiting for my reaction. My father's hand was on my arm. My mother gasped, but it all seemed far away. My sister had just announced to everyone that my dead husband had cheated on me with her, that my nephew was actually Michael's child, and that she wanted half of my house. And then, to my own surprise, I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Not a happy smile, but the kind that comes when something is so absurdly, impossibly false that it becomes almost funny. I pressed my lips together, trying not to laugh out loud at the sheer audacity of what Jennifer was claiming. Because she had made one critical mistake. There was something about Michael that Jennifer did not know, something that made her entire story not just a lie, but a biological impossibility. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand what Michael and I had together. We met 12 years ago at a charity auction for children with cancer. I was volunteering, helping organize the silent auction items, when this handsome man with kind eyes outbid everyone for a watercolor painting I had been admiring all evening. It showed the skyline at sunset with beautiful oranges and purples. After he won, he walked straight over to me and handed me the painting. He said, "I noticed you looking at this all night," he told me with a warm smile. "I think it belongs with you." That was Michael, thoughtful, generous, and the kind of man who paid attention to small details. We went on our first date the next night, and it felt like I had known him my entire life. He was a lawyer at a big firm, brilliant but humble, the type of person who remembered servers' names and asked real questions about their lives. 8 months later, he proposed with the city skyline behind us, mirroring the painting that had brought us together. He said, "I want to look at this view with you for the rest of my life," he told me as he got down on a knee. We bought our house in the historic district shortly after our first anniversary. It cost $800,000, which was a stretch for us financially, but Michael had just made partner at his law firm, and my interior design business was growing. The Victorian house needed work, but it had beautiful high ceilings and a small garden where I imagined our future children would play someday. Those children never came, though, not for lack of trying. We spent years charting my cycles, visiting specialists, trying everything the doctors suggested. We went through 4 rounds of in vitro fertilization that drained our savings and our hope. I said, I still remember the last failed attempt, I told my therapist later. We drove home from the clinic in silence, both of us knowing that that was the end of that road. She said, we can still have a beautiful life, you and me, that is enough. And he meant it. We slowly rebuilt our dreams around a different future. We traveled to Italy and Greece. We renovated our house room by room until it looked like something from a magazine. Michael supported my business when I launched my own design firm, and we created a life that was full and meaningful, even if it looked different than what we had originally planned.
My younger sister, Jennifer, was always the wild child in our family. 4 years younger than me, she bounced between jobs and relationships while I was building my career and marriage. Our parents constantly worried about her, which meant they constantly made excuses for her behavior and bailed her out of financial problems. Jennifer and I had a complicated relationship since childhood. She was beautiful and charming, the kind of person who could light up a room. But there was always this undercurrent of competition from her side. If I achieved something, she needed to one-up me. When I started dating Michael, she suddenly became interested in dating lawyers, too. When we bought our house, she complained for months about her apartment until our parents helped her with rent money. It was exhausting, but Michael encouraged me to maintain the relationship. He said, she is your only sister, he would remind me. Family is important. So I tried, even when it was hard. 2 years ago, Jennifer started dating Derek, a bartender she met at a club. He was good-looking in a rough way, covered in tattoos, riding a motorcycle that our parents hated. Their relationship seemed volatile, with dramatic breakups and passionate makeups every few weeks. Then came the surprise pregnancy announcement at Thanksgiving. She said, I am going to be a mother, Jennifer announced at dinner with theatrical tears. This was shocking because she had always said she never wanted kids. She said, women who have children are just conforming to patriarchal expectations, she used to tell me during my fertility struggles, which hurt more than she probably realized. But suddenly she was pregnant and talking about the miracle of life. I felt that familiar sting of jealousy, wondering why it was so easy for her when Michael and I had tried so hard. But I pushed those feelings down and decided to be the best aunt I could be. Ethan was born healthy, 8 pounds and 4 ounces. I was at the hospital with flowers and a blanket I had spent months knitting. Jennifer seemed overwhelmed from day one, calling me in tears about his crying or her exhaustion. I said, I cannot do this, she would sob into the phone at 2 in the morning. I said, I am a terrible mother. I stepped in as much as I could, sometimes watching Ethan overnight so she could sleep. I fell in love with that baby boy, buying him clothes and toys, singing him to sleep when Jennifer needed a break. Michael was less involved, which I thought was because of our own infertility struggles. I said, maybe it is too painful for him, I told myself. I said, he needs space from babies that are not ours. Looking back, I understand now why he kept his distance. That Tuesday started like any other morning. Michael got up early for his workout, showered, and came downstairs in his suit for breakfast. We talked about our plans for the evening, something simple like picking up Thai food and watching a movie. He said, I have an important client meeting this morning, he told me as he poured his coffee, but I should be done by 2. Then he winced and rubbed his temple. He said, I have a headache, he said. It's pretty bad. I said, maybe you should stay home, I suggested, feeling worried. I said, you can reschedule the meeting. He said, it's just a migraine, he insisted, kissing me on the forehead. I'll take some medicine and I'll be fine. I'll call you after the meeting. That was the last conversation we ever had. He walked out the door with his briefcase and I watched him get into his car from the kitchen window. I wish I had known it was the last time I would see him alive. I would have said more. I would have held him longer.
The call came at 11:30. A nurse from the hospital told me Michael had collapsed during his client meeting. She said, "You need to come right away," she said gently. She said, "It is very serious." I dropped everything and drove to the hospital, breaking every speed limit, praying the entire way. But by the time I arrived, he was already gone. She said it was a brain aneurysm, the doctor explained. He said there was nothing anyone could have done. It happened very quickly. He did not suffer. Michael was 36 years old. We were supposed to have decades together. We were supposed to grow old on that porch swing, watching sunsets and talking about our day. Instead, I was signing paperwork and making arrangements to bury my husband. The next week passed in a fog of funeral planning, phone calls, and people bringing casseroles I couldn't eat. Jennifer barely appeared during any of it. She said, "Ethan is sick," she texted when I asked where she was. She said, "I can't find anyone to watch him." When she finally showed up at the funeral, she stayed in the back and left before the reception. At the time, I was too grief-stricken to think much about it. Now I understand why she kept her distance. 1 week after we buried Michael, I forced myself to go to Ethan's first birthday party. I put on a dress, wrapped the gift I had bought weeks earlier, and drove to Jennifer's rental house. When her friend Rachel opened the door, her eyes went wide. She said, "Oh, Sarah, you made it," she said in a strange voice, glancing over her shoulder. She said, "Everyone is in the backyard." The house was decorated with blue balloons and a banner that said, "Happy First Birthday, Ethan." I noticed people whispering in the kitchen, falling silent when I walked past. In the backyard, more guests stood in small groups, and everyone seemed tense. My parents looked uncomfortable at a picnic table. He said, "We were not sure you would come," my father said when he saw me. I said, "Of course I came," I replied, setting the gift down. I said, "Where's the birthday boy?" After 30 awkward minutes of people offering condolences and avoiding eye contact, Jennifer emerged with Ethan. That is when she made her announcement about Michael being Ethan's father and showed everyone a will that supposedly left half my house to Ethan. Everyone stared at me, waiting to see if I would break down crying or scream or cause a scene. But instead, I felt this bizarre urge to laugh. My sister was claiming she had slept with Michael, that Ethan was his biological son, and that she deserved $400,000 worth of my house. It was such an outrageous lie that it was almost comical. I said, "Oh, I see," I replied calmly. I said, "May I see this will, Jennifer?" She looked confused by my calm reaction, but handed me the document. I scanned it quickly, immediately noticing problems. The legal language was wrong, nothing like the documents Michael brought home from work. And the signature, while close to Michael's, was clearly forged. The way the letters connected was slightly off. I said, "Thank you for sharing this with me," I told her, handing it back. I said, "I think I need to go now. This is Ethan's day. We can discuss this privately later." I said goodbye to my shocked parents and walked to my car. Once inside, safely alone, I finally let out the laugh that had been building. It started small and then grew until tears streamed down my face. Not tears of joy, but tears of anger and disbelief at Jennifer's audacity. Because there was something she did not know, something Michael and I had never told anyone, something that made her elaborate lie not just hurtful, but biologically impossible. To understand why Jennifer's claim was impossible, I need to tell you about something that happened 3 years ago. Michael had been in pain for weeks before he finally went to see a specialist. He said, "I probably just pulled something at the gym," he kept insisting, but I made him get it checked out. The urologist diagnosed him with a varicocele, which is an enlargement of veins in the scrotum. He needed surgery to correct it. He said, "It is a routine procedure," the doctor explained. But given the extent of the varicocele and the risk of recurrence, I strongly recommend we perform a vasectomy at the same time. This was a devastating conversation for us. After all our fertility struggles, hearing that Michael should have a vasectomy felt like the universe confirming what we already knew, that we would never have biological children. We sat in that doctor's office holding hands, both of us crying quietly. I said, "Is this really necessary?" I asked the doctor. He said, "Yes, I believe it is the best course of action for your husband's long-term health." He said, "The varicocele is severe enough that without the vasectomy, you're looking at repeated surgeries and ongoing issues." We agreed to the procedure. Michael had the surgery, which included the vasectomy, 2 years before Ethan was conceived. The vasectomy was completely successful, confirmed by follow-up tests. After that surgery, it was physically impossible for Michael to father a child. We kept this information private. After years of invasive questions from family about why we didn't have kids, we had learned to guard our privacy around reproductive issues. My parents didn't know. Jennifer certainly didn't know. The only people who knew were Michael, me, and Michael's doctors. But here's where Michael's thoughtfulness saved me. During his recovery, sitting in our garden with an ice pack, he made a prediction. He said, "Jennifer is not done," he told me seriously. He said, "I have a feeling she might try something drastic someday." I said, "You're being paranoid." I laughed it off at the time. But Michael was not laughing. He said, "I'm serious, Sarah. She's been inappropriate with me for years. I think we need to protect ourselves." That's when he suggested we document everything just in case.
I need to back up and explain why Michael was worried about Jennifer. It started 3 years ago when we had invited her over for dinner to celebrate a new job. Michael had made his famous lasagna, and we opened a nice bottle of wine. Everything seemed fine until I had to step away to take a call from a client having a design emergency. The call took about 20 minutes. When I came back to the dining room, the atmosphere had changed. Michael looked uncomfortable, and Jennifer was sitting much closer to him than before, her hand on his arm, laughing loudly at something. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Jennifer was always touchy-feely, and we had been drinking wine. But that night, as we were getting ready for bed, Michael seemed troubled. He said, "There is something I need to tell you," he began, sitting on the edge of our bed. He said, "I do not want to cause problems between you and your sister, but I also do not want secrets between us." He explained that while I was on the phone, Jennifer had made a pass at him. He said, "She commented on how lucky you were to have me, and then she suggested that I deserved someone who could appreciate me properly," he told me, looking miserable. He said, "When I told her that was inappropriate, she laughed it off and said you were too sensitive if I thought she was serious." I was hurt, but not entirely surprised. Jennifer had always pushed boundaries. I said, "Maybe it was just the wine talking," I suggested. I said, "Let us just forget it happened." But it did not stop there. Over the next several months, Jennifer found ways to touch Michael whenever I left the room. She sent him text messages that walked the line between friendly and flirtatious. Once, she even showed up at his law office uninvited. She said, "I was in the neighborhood and thought maybe we could grab lunch," she told him. Michael politely declined and told me immediately. After that incident, we decided to talk to my parents about Jennifer's behavior. That conversation went terribly. She said, "I think you are misinterpreting friendly gestures," my mother said defensively. She said, "Jennifer just looks up to Michael like a brother." My father was even worse. He said, "Are you sure you are not feeling flattered by the attention and exaggerating?" he asked Michael, which made my husband's face turn red with anger. That night, Michael and I made a decision. We would create distance from Jennifer without causing a family explosion. We declined invitations where she would be present. We made sure we were never alone with her. Michael blocked her number after she sent him a particularly suggestive message at midnight. He said, "I want to document all of this," Michael told me. He said, "If she ever tries to make false accusations, we need proof of what really happened." After Michael's surgery and vasectomy, we took his concerns seriously. We scheduled an appointment with Robert Martinez, our family attorney. I went with Michael to the meeting and we explained everything: Jennifer's inappropriate behavior, the unwanted advances, and Michael's recent medical procedure. He said, "I recommend documenting everything," Robert advised. He said, "Create a file with the medical records, screenshots of text messages, everything. You never know when it might become relevant." Michael also made sure his will was properly updated, officially filed with the court, leaving everything to me. We put all the original documents in a safety deposit box at our bank, along with Michael's medical records proving the vasectomy.
He said, "Just in case," Michael said as we locked the box. He said, "Though I plan to be around to deal with any of Jennifer's drama for at least another 50 years. We both laughed at that. We thought we had time. We thought we were being overly cautious. Michael even kept a journal, documenting every inappropriate interaction with Jennifer. He recorded dates, times, and exact quotes. He said, "If she ever tries anything, we will have a timeline," he explained. It seemed paranoid at the time, but now I understand how much Michael was trying to protect me, even from beyond the grave. There was one more thing in that safety deposit box, a sealed envelope with my name written in Michael's handwriting. I didn't know it existed until after he died, but when I found it, it broke my heart and gave me strength at the same time. The morning after Ethan's birthday party, I drove straight to the bank. The manager, who had known Michael and me for years, expressed his condolences as he led me to the vault. I sat alone in the small viewing room and opened our safety deposit box. Inside was everything I needed. Michael's legitimate will, properly notarized and filed, leaving everything to me. His medical records detailing the vasectomy 2 years before Ethan's conception. The journal documenting Jennifer's behavior with dates and details. Printed screenshots of her inappropriate text messages. A letter from Robert confirming he had witnessed Michael's real will. And at the bottom, that sealed envelope with my name. With shaking hands, I opened it. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began, in Michael's familiar handwriting. "If you are reading this, something has happened to me and you have needed to access these documents. I hope it is many years from now and Jennifer's antics are nothing but a distant memory. But if not, if the worst has happened and she has tried to hurt you in my absence, please know I tried to prepare for every possibility. Use these documents to protect yourself. I know how much you value family, how loyal you are, but you deserve protection from those who would take advantage of that beautiful heart of yours. I love you beyond words, beyond time. Whatever happens, know that. Michael." Tears streamed down my face as I read his words. My thoughtful, protective husband had anticipated this scenario. He had known Jennifer might try something after his death, and he had prepared to protect me even when he could not be there himself. I carefully copied what I needed and called Robert Martinez. I said, "I need to see you this afternoon," I told him. I said, "It is urgent." Robert's law office was downtown in a converted historic building. When I arrived, he stood and embraced me briefly. He said, "I was devastated to hear about Michael," he told me. He said, "He was one of the good ones." I said, "He was," I agreed, my voice catching. I said, "And it seems he was right about preparing for the worst with Jennifer." I explained what happened at the birthday party and showed him the forged will. He said, "This is an amateur forgery," Robert said, examining it. He said, "The language is completely wrong and the signature would never stand up to analysis. But the fact that she created this at all is deeply concerning." I showed him the documents from the safety deposit box. He said, "Michael was nothing if not thorough," Robert said, reviewing everything. He said, "These medical records alone disprove her claim. The vasectomy was performed 2 years before the child was conceived. It is biologically impossible for Michael to be the father." I said, "What should I do?" I asked. I said, "I do not want to humiliate her publicly, but I cannot let her take half my house based on a lie." He said, "First, we need more information." He said, "I recommend hiring a private investigator to look into Jennifer's current situation. People rarely attempt fraud like this without serious financial pressure." He called Tony Sullivan, a former detective who now worked as a private investigator. Tony arrived within an hour, a stocky man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. He said, "Tell me everything," he instructed, taking out a notepad. I explained the situation and Tony asked detailed questions about Jennifer's life. I realized how little I actually knew about her current circumstances. He said, "Give me a few days," Tony said when I finished. He said, "I will find out what is really going on." 3 days later, Robert called requesting an urgent meeting. When I arrived at his office, both men were reviewing documents spread across the conference table. He said, "Mrs. Harper," Tony began, using my married name. He said, "I have uncovered some very concerning information about your sister." According to his investigation, Jennifer was drowning in debt. She had over $75,000 in credit card debt, personal loans, and medical bills for Ethan, who had needed heart surgery as an infant. Her credit score was terrible, and she had been rejected for multiple loans. And she is facing eviction, Tony continued, sliding a document toward me. He said, "This is the notice her landlord filed. She has until the end of the month to pay 4 months of back rent or get out." As for Derek, he had left Jennifer and Ethan shortly after the birth, moving across the country with a new girlfriend. He said he pays minimal child support. He said $200 a month when he remembers. Then Tony showed me something that made my blood run cold. Text messages between Jennifer and her friend Rachel talking about her plan to claim part of my house. "Michael's death is terrible, but maybe it's my chance to finally get what I deserve," Jennifer had written. "That house is worth at least $800,000 now. If I play this right, I'll have a nice nest egg for Ethan and me. The will is almost ready. My friend Kevin is good with Photoshop and found a sample of Michael's signature online. It looks totally legit. Bridget has always been the golden child. Time for me to get my share." I felt sick reading her calculated words. This was not just desperation, it was premeditated fraud designed to exploit my grief. After much thought and consultation with my therapist, I decided to confront Jennifer privately with all the evidence. I would offer her a choice: face legal consequences for fraud and forgery, or accept accountability and a compromise that would help Ethan while protecting me. I said, "We need to talk about the will," I told Jennifer when I called her. I said, "Can you come to my house tomorrow afternoon? Just you, no Ethan." She said, "I knew you would come around," she replied smugly. She said, "I will be there at 2." I spent the morning preparing, arranging documents in order and setting up recording equipment on Robert's advice. He said Massachusetts requires two-party consent, he had warned me. He said, "Ask for her permission at the start," framing it as creating a record of your agreement. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Jennifer stood on my porch wearing a new outfit, looking confident. I said, "Come in," I told her, leading her to the living room. I had set up 2 chairs facing each other with a coffee table between us. On the table sat a recorder, 2 glasses of water, and a folder of documents. I said, "I hope you do not mind if we record our conversation," I began. I said, "It seems prudent given the legal nature of what we are discussing." She said, "Sure, whatever makes you comfortable," Jennifer replied. She said, "I think this can be pretty straightforward. The will is clear." I turned on the recorder, stated the date and time, and confirmed her consent. Then I sat back and studied my sister's face. I said, "Before we discuss the will, I would like to understand exactly what you are claiming happened between you and Michael." Jennifer launched into her rehearsed story. According to her, she and Michael had connected during a period when he and I were supposedly having marriage problems. She said, "We met several times at a hotel downtown," she claimed. She said, "Michael confessed he was unhappy and that I understood him in ways you did not." I listened without interrupting, noting the contradictions in her timeline. When she finished, I started asking specific questions. I said, "Which hotel did you meet at?" She said, "The Fairmont," she replied quickly. I said, "What room number do you remember?" She faltered. She said, "It was on a high floor. I do not recall the exact number." I said, "What days of the week did you usually meet?" She said, "Tuesdays, sometimes Thursdays," she answered. She said, "When he told you he was working late." I continued with increasingly specific questions. What did Michael order from room service? What side of the bed did he prefer? Details that only someone who had actually been intimate with him would know. Jennifer grew more flustered with each question, her answers becoming vague or contradictory. She said, "Why does any of this matter?" she finally snapped. She said, "The point is, Ethan is Michael's son, and the will proves it." I said, "Actually, both of those claims are demonstrably false," I replied calmly, opening my folder. I placed the medical records on the coffee table between us. I said, 2 years before Ethan was conceived, Michael had a vasectomy following surgery for varicocele. It was completely successful, confirmed by follow-up tests. It was physically impossible for him to father a child after that procedure. Jennifer's face went white. She picked up the records with trembling hands, scanning the clinical language and dates. She said, "These could be faked," she said weakly. I said, "They are not." I said, "Michael's doctor is prepared to testify to their authenticity if necessary, but that is just the beginning." I produced Michael's legitimate will, properly notarized and filed. I said, "This is Michael's actual will, prepared by Robert Martinez and witnessed by 2 partners at his law firm. As you can see, it leaves everything to me with no mention of Ethan." She said, "He must have changed it." She said, "The will I have is more recent." I said, "The will you have is a forgery," I said evenly. I said, "Robert has already identified multiple legal errors, and the signature is clearly fake. Creating a fraudulent will is a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison." I continued presenting evidence methodically. Michael's journal documenting her inappropriate advances, the text messages between her and Rachel discussing the plan, the investigator's report detailing her debt, eviction notice, and Derek's abandonment. I said, "We know everything, Jennifer," I told her as she sat in stunned silence. I said, "The question now is what happens next." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, to my surprise, she began to cry. Not her usual theatrical tears, but deep, body-racking sobs. She said, "I did not know what else to do." She said, "I'm going to be homeless. Ethan and I will be on the street in 2 weeks." I said, "So you decided to destroy Michael's reputation?" I said, "To tell everyone he cheated on me? To forge legal documents?" She said, "I was desperate," she yelled back, her sadness turning to anger. She said, "You have everything. This big house, a successful business, everyone's respect. What do I have? A baby with medical problems, $75,000 in debt, and an eviction notice. You try making good decisions in that situation." Her outburst hung in the air. The raw honesty of it, stripped of manipulation, reached something in me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps understanding. I said, "Ethan is Derek's son, isn't he?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. She said, "Yes, Michael never touched me. Not like that. I tried years ago. He always shut me down. He was annoyingly loyal to you." I said, "And the will?" She said, "My friend Kevin helped me create it." She said, "He does graphic design and thought it would be easy to fake a signature. I was going to use it to pressure you into giving me money. I never thought you would investigate so thoroughly." I turned off the recorder and sat back, considering my next move. Jennifer watched me nervously, clearly expecting the worst. I said I could press charges, I began slowly. I said what you did was illegal, not to mention cruel. You tried to destroy my husband's memory while I was grieving. She nodded miserably. She said, "I know." I said, "But that would hurt Ethan," I continued. I said, "And despite everything, he is my nephew. I love him." I leaned forward, making sure she was looking directly at me. I said, "So here is what is going to happen. You are going to tell everyone the truth, that you lied about the affair, that Ethan is not Michael's son, and that you forged the will. You will apologize publicly to me and to Michael's memory." She said, "And then what?" she asked, her voice small. She said, "We will still be evicted." I said, "I am not finished," I replied. I said, "In exchange for your full confession and a legal agreement never to attempt anything like this again, I will help you and Ethan, not by giving you half my house, but by setting up a trust fund for Ethan's education and medical needs, and helping you find stable housing." Her eyes widened in shock. She said, "Why would you do that after what I did?" I said, "Not for you," I answered honestly. I said, "For Ethan, and because Michael would want me to help his nephew, even if that nephew's mother tried to destroy his reputation." I said, "There will be conditions," I continued. I said, "You will enter therapy and financial counseling. You will maintain steady employment, and you will allow me to be part of Ethan's life to ensure he is being properly cared for. If you violate any of these conditions, the support stops immediately." Jennifer was quiet for a long time, processing everything. She said, "I do not deserve your help," she finally said. I said, "No, you do not," I agreed. I said, "But Ethan deserves a stable home and medical care, and I deserve to have my husband's memory untarnished. This solution gives us both what we need." After more discussion of details, Jennifer agreed to my terms. We would meet with Robert the next day to formalize the agreement, and she would make her public confession at a family dinner that weekend. As I showed her to the door, she paused. She said, "I really am sorry, Sarah. I have been jealous of you my whole life. Everything always seemed to come so easily to you." I said, "Nothing about my life has been easy." I said, "You just never bothered to look past the surface. Maybe it's time you started." The family dinner I arranged for Saturday evening was tense from the moment my parents arrived. My mother brought her signature pot roast as a peace offering. She said, "I don't know what this is about," she told me nervously. She said, "But Jennifer has been calling us in tears, saying you're forcing her to come to some sort of family meeting." I said, "Just wait until everyone is here." I said, "This needs to be addressed once, with everyone present." By 7 o'clock, we were all seated around my dining room table. My parents, Jennifer without Ethan, and me. Robert had advised recording this conversation too, and a small recorder sat in the center of the table. I said, "Thank you all for coming," I began after explaining the recording. I said, "I have asked Jennifer to share some important information with you." "Jennifer?" My sister looked pale and uncomfortable. She stared at her plate as she spoke. She said, "I lied about Ethan being Michael's son," she said. "Michael and I never had an affair. Ethan is Derek's child, and I forged the will I showed at the birthday party." My parents stared at her in shock. He said, "But why would you do such a thing?" my father demanded. He said, "Do you have any idea what that claim did to your sister, to Michael's reputation?" Jennifer explained her desperate financial situation, her mounting debts, Derek's abandonment, and the eviction notice. As she spoke, I watched my mother's expression shift from shock to sympathy. She said, "Oh, honey, why didn't you just come to us for help?" my mother said when Jennifer finished. She said, "You didn't need to make up terrible lies." She said, "Would you have given me $400,000? Jennifer asked bluntly. She said, "Because that's what I would have gotten if my plan worked, half the value of my house." He said, "Of course we couldn't give you that kind of money." He said, "But we could have helped with rent. Instead, you chose to try to defraud your own sister while she was grieving." She said, "I know it was wrong," Jennifer admitted. She said, "Sarah has the evidence to press charges if she wanted to." My mother turned to me in alarm. She said, "You wouldn't do that to your own sister, would you?" I felt frustrated at her immediate defense of Jennifer, even now. I said, "I could," I responded firmly. I said, "What she did was not just immoral, but illegal. Forgery and fraud are felonies." She said, "But she's family," she insisted, "and she has Ethan to think about." I said, "I'm family too," I replied, my voice rising. I said, "Your daughter too, the one who just lost her husband and then had to defend his memory against false accusations. Where was your concern for me in all this?" My father shifted uncomfortably. He said, "Of course we care about you, Sarah, but Jennifer has always needed more help." I said, "And whose fault is that?" I said, "You've been bailing her out of poor decisions her entire life. Maybe if you let her face consequences occasionally, she wouldn't have escalated to criminal behavior." The room fell silent. My parents looked uncomfortable, finally confronting their role in enabling Jennifer's behavior. I said, "I have decided not to press charges," I said, "but only because of Ethan and only under specific conditions that Jennifer has agreed to." I explained the agreement: Jennifer's public confession, therapy and financial counseling, steady employment, and my ongoing involvement in Ethan's life. I would also be setting up a trust fund for Ethan's needs. He said, "That's very generous of you," he quieted. "More generous given what she did." I said, "It's what Michael would have wanted." I said, "He always believed in helping family, even when it was hard. I'm honoring that belief while also protecting myself." Jennifer spoke up, her voice shaky. She said, "I will do better, I promise. I will follow every condition, and I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you." I said, "Actions, not words," I told her firmly. "That's what matters now." 6 months have passed since that terrible birthday party and the confrontation that followed. Jennifer has kept her promise so far. She started therapy immediately and has been attending financial counseling sessions twice a month. She found a stable job as a receptionist at a dental office, and for the first time in her life, she has kept a job for more than a few months. I helped her find a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood, and the trust fund I established covers Ethan's medical expenses and will eventually pay for his education. Jennifer is required to send me monthly updates on how the money is being used, and I visit Ethan twice a week. Watching him grow, knowing he is safe and cared for, brings me peace. My relationship with Jennifer will never be what it was, and honestly, what it was before was not very healthy anyway. We are rebuilding something new, based on honesty and clear boundaries, rather than pretending everything is fine when it is not. She understands now that actions have consequences, and I understand that helping someone does not mean letting them hurt you. My parents have also done some soul-searching. My father apologized to me privately one evening. He said, "We enabled her bad behavior for too long," he admitted. He said, "We thought we were helping, but we were just teaching her she could always escape consequences. We are sorry we did not see how much that hurt you." The hardest part of these months has been grieving Michael while dealing with everything Jennifer put me through. Some days I am angry at him for leaving me. Other days I am overwhelmed with gratitude for how thoroughly he prepared to protect me even after his death. His thoughtfulness, his documentation, his letter, all of it was an act of love that reached across the divide between life and death. I still talk to him sometimes, sitting on our porch swing at sunset. I said, "You were right about Jennifer," I told him recently. I said, "You saw what was coming and you protected me. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." As I reflect on everything that has happened, I have learned some profound lessons that I want to share with others who might face similar situations. First, trust your instincts when someone's behavior makes you uncomfortable. Michael knew something was wrong with Jennifer's attention years before this crisis, and he took steps to protect us. If someone in your life is crossing boundaries, document it and set firm limits immediately. Second, family loyalty should never mean accepting abuse or fraud. I love Ethan and I wanted to help Jennifer, but I did not have to accept her lies or give her what she demanded. You can help someone while also protecting yourself. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. Third, proper documentation is everything. Michael's journal, the medical records, the legitimate will, all of these documents saved me from a lengthy legal battle and protected his reputation. If you sense potential problems, document everything with dates, times, and witnesses. Fourth, people rarely commit fraud without desperate circumstances, but desperation does not excuse harmful behavior. Understanding why Jennifer did what she did helped me offer a solution that addressed her real problems while holding her accountable. Consequences and compassion can coexist. Fifth, grief makes you vulnerable, and some people will exploit that vulnerability. Jennifer waited right after Michael's funeral to make her move, knowing I would be at my weakest. Be especially cautious about major decisions and claims during periods of grief. Seek advice from trusted professionals before acting. Sixth, enabling poor behavior helps no one. My parents thought they were being kind by constantly bailing Jennifer out, but they were actually preventing her from learning responsibility. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face consequences. Finally, karma does catch up with people, but sometimes karma needs documentation and a good lawyer to work properly. Justice prevailed in my situation, not through magic or fate, but because Michael had the foresight to prepare evidence and I had the strength to use it. Today, I am rebuilding my life without Michael. My interior design business is thriving. I am renovating the garden he loved so much. I am seeing a wonderful therapist who is helping me process my grief and anger. And I am learning that I am stronger than I ever knew.
To anyone facing a similar situation where a family member tries to exploit your grief or vulnerability, here's my advice. Do not stay silent. Do not let family pressure prevent you from seeking justice. Gather your evidence, consult professionals, and remember that protecting yourself is not selfish, it's necessary. You can be compassionate while also demanding accountability. You can help someone in need while also establishing firm boundaries. And you can honor your loved one's memory by refusing to let others destroy it with lies. Michael's death broke my heart, but it did not break me. Jennifer's betrayal hurt deeply, but it taught me the difference between family who love you and family who use you. And through it all, I learned that I have the strength to stand up for myself, to demand truth, and to create a life of integrity. That's Michael's true legacy, not the money or the house, but the example he set of protecting you love, planning for the worst while hoping for the best, and always, always choosing truth over comfortable lies. I still miss him every single day. I still reach for him in the middle of the night and feel the emptiness where he used to be. But I'm surviving. More than that, I'm learning to thrive again. And I know, wherever he is, Michael is proud of how I handled this impossible situation. To anyone watching or reading this, remember, justice is not always immediate, but it is possible. Truth is more powerful than lies, even when lies are louder. And you are stronger than you think, even in your darkest moments. Thank you for listening to my story. If it helps even one person stand up against fraud or manipulation, then sharing these painful details will have been worth it. Like and subscribe if this resonated with you. And remember, in the end, karma always catches up, especially when you have the receipts to help it along.